Market Mantra. Market Mantra. Market Mantra. Market Mantra. Market Mantra. Market Mantra.
Welcome to this Wednesday edition of Market Mantra, the program in which we give you a complete update on the economic, business and stock market news of the day. Well, I am Nishit Kumar and with me is my co-anchor in Hindi, Vishal Sharma.
नमस्कार, मार्केट मंत्र में आप सभी का स्वागत। प्रतिदिन की तरह हम आर्थिक, व्यापारिक और शेयर बाजार से जुड़ी ताजा खबरें आप तक लाएंगे और उन पर चर्चा भी करेंगे। चर्चा के लिए हमारे साथ कार्यक्रम में ऑनलाइन विशेषज्ञ भी जुड़ेंगे। सबसे पहले हेडलाइंस के साथ हैं निशित कुमार।
Erasing all its early gains, Sensex drops 163 points, Nifty loses 46 points, Rupee gains 11 paise. Credit rating agency CRISIL upgrades India Inc.'s credit quality outlook to positive from the earlier cautiously optimistic. And Union Cabinet approves financial outlay of over 11,000 crore rupees to boost the production of edible oils and reduce imports.
शुरुआती बढ़त गंवाकर सेंसेक्स 163 अंक लुढ़का, निफ्टी में 46 अंक का नुकसान, रुपया 11 पैसे हुआ मजबूत। क्रेडिट रेटिंग एजेंसी क्रिसिल ने भारतीय उद्योग जगत की ऋण गुणवत्ता का स्तर बढ़ाकर सकारात्मक किया और केंद्रीय मंत्रिमंडल ने खाद्य तेलों का उत्पादन बढ़ाने और आयात में कमी लाने के लिए 11,000 करोड़ रुपए की वित्तीय परिव्यय को मंजूरी दी। और शुरुआत सबसे पहले शेयर बाजार से करते हैं। बॉम्बे स्टॉक एक्सचेंज का सेंसेक्स आज शुरुआती बढ़त गंवाकर 0.3% के नुकसान से 163 अंक गिरकर 55,629 पर बंद हुआ। नेशनल स्टॉक एक्सचेंज का निफ्टी भी 46 अंक फिसलकर 16,569 पर आ गया। हालांकि अंतर्दिवसीय कारोबार में सुबह के सत्र में सेंसेक्स और निफ्टी दोनों ने रिकॉर्ड ऊंचाई को छुआ। व्यापक बाजार की बात करें तो बीएसई मिड कैप इंडेक्स में 0.3% की बढ़त दर्ज हुई, लेकिन स्मॉल कैप इंडेक्स 0.2% के नुकसान में रहा।
The stock markets erasing all its early gains. The Sensex at the Bombay Stock Exchange dropped 163 points or 0.3% to end at 55,629 today. The Nifty at the National Stock Exchange slipped 46 points to 16,569. Both the Sensex and the Nifty hit its record intraday highs in the morning session. And in the broader market, the BSE Mid-Cap Index inched up 0.3 points, but the small cap index shed 0.2%. The market breadth on the BSE was negative, with nearly 2 declining indices for every single gainer. And among the sectoral indices on the BSE, the BankX and the Metal Index led the declining, dropping 1% each. The Realty Index declined 0.7% and the Finance Index slipped 0.5%. Among the advancing indices, the Energy Index inched up 0.3%, while the FMCG, the Consumer Durables and the Oil and Gas Index gained 0.2%.
और रुपए के प्रदर्शन पर नजर डालें तो अंतरबैंक विदेशी मुद्रा विनिमय बाजार में रुपया आज 11 पैसे मजबूत होकर $1 के मुकाबले 74 रुपए 24 पैसे के स्तर पर बंद हुआ। रुख एशियाई बाजारों का कर लेते हैं और एशियाई बाजारों की बात करें तो अमेरिकी केंद्रीय बैंक फेडरल रिजर्व के आर्थिक सहायता पैकेज में संभावित कमी से पहले एशियाई शेयर बाजारों में आज बढ़त दर्ज की गई। जापान का निकेई सूचकांक 0.6% चढ़ा। चीन के शंघाई कंपोजिट इंडेक्स में 1.1% की बढ़त दर्ज हुई। दक्षिण कोरिया का कोस्पी और हांगकांग का हैंगसेंग दोनों 0.5% और सिंगापुर का स्ट्रेट्स टाइम्स इंडेक्स 0.4% की बढ़त के साथ बंद हुए। यूरोपीय शेयर बाजारों में अंतर्दिवसीय कारोबार में गिरावट का रुख रहा। लंदन का FTSE 100 0.3% और फ्रांस का कैक 0.4% गिरावट में रहे, जबकि जर्मनी का डेक्स 0.2% के नुकसान के साथ कारोबार कर रहा था।
In the Asian markets, it ended higher today as investors awaited an update from the Federal Reserve on possible plans to reduce the U.S. stimulus, and so Japan's Nikkei 225 index added 0.6% and China's Shanghai Composite Index climbed 1.1%. South Korea's Kospi and Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index gained 0.5% each, and Singapore's Straits Times Index rose 0.4%. And in Europe, London's FTSE 100 had declined 0.3%, and France's CAC 40 had dropped 0.4%, while Germany's DAX had shed 0.2% in intraday trade.
और शेयर बाजारों में आज के कारोबार पर बात करने के लिए हमारे साथ जुड़ गए हैं बाजार विश्लेषक अविनाश गोरक्षकर। अविनाश गोरक्षकर जी, नमस्कार, कार्यक्रम में आपका स्वागत।
गुड इवनिंग
जी। आज घरेलू बाजारों की बात करें तो अविनाश जी, रिकॉर्ड ऊंचाई से फिसलकर बंद हुए हैं बाजार। केवल मुनाफा वसूली आप एक वजह देखते हैं या कोई और भी कारण आपको लगता है कि आज जो बाजार गिरावट के साथ बंद हुए हैं?
नहीं, मुझे लग रहा है कि ज्यादातर ये मुनाफा वसूली है, क्योंकि देखिए पिछले 2-3 दिनों से मार्केट में जिस प्रकार से मार्केट में उछाल आया है, मुझे लग रहा है कि मार्केट बहुत कम समय में इंडेक्स में तेजी पकड़ी थी। स्पेशली अगर हम लार्ज कैप और मिड कैप की स्टॉक की बात करें तो मुझे लग रहा है कि 16,500 के ऊपर मार्केट काफी सिग्निफिकेंटली गया। उसके बाद आज भी मार्केट ने एक बहुत अच्छा उछाल दिखाया। तो ये मुनाफा वसूली है और ऑब्वियस है कि ये ज्यादातर ट्रेडिंग वॉल्यूम से हुआ है। क्वार्टरली सीजन तो खत्म हो चुका है और अभी पूरी जो ऑब्जर्वेशन है वो यूएस मार्केट के ऊपर है, प्लस जो मैक्रो नंबर्स आएंगे तो जीएसटी के, प्लस जो भी आईआईपी के नंबर्स आएंगे उसके ऊपर सबकी नजर रहेंगी। बट ओवरऑल मार्केट बहुत तेजी से भागा था, तो ये मुनाफा वसूली है और मेरे ख्याल से इसमें ज्यादातर रिटेल और एचएनआई का जो कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशन है वही से बिकवाली आ रही है, क्योंकि यही मार्केट्स को अभी लिक्विडिटी के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से चला रहे हैं। प्लस काफी लोग आईपीओ मार्केट में भी एक्टिव है, तो वो पैसा जो रिफंड होके आया है वो भी मार्केट पे ट्रेडिंग में जा रहा है। तो मोटा मोटी थोड़ी सी मुनाफा वसूली है, इसमें कोई बड़ी पैनिक की बात नहीं है। बट हो सकता है कि मार्केट्स आने वाले दिनों में थोड़ा सा रेंज बाउंड रहे और बाद में स्टॉक स्पेसिफिक एक्शन आपको देखने को मिले।
Well, Avinash, rightly you mentioned about the IPO. 2021 is almost India's year of the IPO. The domestic unicorns, through their public issues, are setting the domestic stock markets on fire and global investors in a frenzy. How do you see this IPO burst on the domestic scene panning out in the short term and also its impact on the markets?
Yeah, I think first of all, market, whenever we see this kind of euphoria in the IPO market, it's a time for little concern, because whenever we see a lot of IPOs getting bunched out, like in the month of August, the first week, we saw 6 IPOs opening on one single day. Although all the IPOs got a very heavy reception, I think markets are really experiencing euphoria in the sense everybody wants to make quick money in these IPOs.
Yeah.
And pricing for these IPOs is equally aggressive. But despite that, IPOs are getting a very solid response. So my sense is that I think investors should be careful. Whenever a lot of primary paper gets released, there is obviously a pressure on the secondary market. And I think all said and done, the markets are definitely reflecting the fact that there is a lot of greed and short-term, kind of, intentions by investors here. So I think it could possibly lead to some sort of a major kind of correction, if the market sentiment corrects significantly. Because in all sense, the merchant banking, advisors obviously have valued most of these companies on the higher side. So the real story for me of the IPOs would come out only once, maybe 1 or 2 quarter performances come out, there are conference calls. But till then, it's going to be euphoria which is going to actually run the markets. And I think investors need to be a little careful and not get carried away by the IPO sentiment which is presently, prevailing in the market.
Indeed, and also the newly listed Indian stocks are almost beating the benchmark by most in the last 7 years, and helped by the record pace of the IPOs, of course. So do you feel that more and more IPOs would fire up the Indian growth story, or would they kind of lose their steam in the long run?
See, I think the Indian IPOs will not actually affect the India growth story, but what could happen is market could possibly witness a healthy correction, because ultimately with so much paper coming out in the market, what we are seeing is that a large percentage of the IPOs are being funded by HNI money, and that too funded by the banks or by the NBFCs. So, this is fast money, and whenever returns are fast, it's actually the bank or the NBFC which makes the maximum amount of gain. Investors are becoming traders, and unfortunately, businesses cannot be evaluated on a 3-month or a 1-month kind of price appreciation. So my sense is, I think, good companies, good businesses at the right valuation would obviously be good. It's always better to look at these companies once the dust settles down, the excitement goes away, rather than buying any stock, in a euphoria kind of market. So you're going to see this euphoria ending at some point of time. So I think investors should be careful. Even if they apply, they should actually book out their gains because, historically we have seen that whenever these IPOs do well, over the next 6 or 8 months, the excitement dies out and most of these IPOs trade below their IPO price. So I think this is something which investors should not forget.
जी अविनाश जी, अगर आईटी सेक्टर के शेयर्स की बात करें तो हम देख रहे हैं कि 52 सप्ताह के उच्च स्तर पर पहुंच गए हैं और देखा जाए तो अगर बाजार पूंजीकरण की बात करें तो टीसीएस जो है वो 13 लाख करोड़ रुपए के बाजार पूंजीकरण के साथ अब दूसरी कंपनी बन गई है रिलायंस के बाद। तो क्या अब आईटी सेक्टर के शेयर्स में प्रॉफिट बुकिंग का ये आप सही समय मानते हैं या निवेशकों को अभी और तेजी का इंतजार करना चाहिए?
देखिए, आईटी एक ऐसा सेक्टर है जो कोविड से सबसे ज्यादा बेनिफिट हो चुका है। हम सब जानते हैं कि कोविड के बाद अभी वर्क फ्रॉम होम ज्यादा एनकरेज हो गया है, अभी ऑनलाइन एक्टिविटी बहुत बढ़ गई है और हमारा तो मानना है कि कोविड खत्म होने के बाद भी काफी ऐसे इंडिया में कॉर्पोरेट्स है जो वर्क फ्रॉम होम एनकरेज करेंगे, डिजिटल एक्टिविटी यानी क्लाउड पे उनका डेटा रखेंगे। तो इसलिए ये नया बिजनेस सेगमेंट आईटी कंपनी के लिए खोला है। तो जो कंपनी डिजिटल और क्लाउड में है, जैसे कि काफी ऐसी कंपनीज है जैसे इन्फोसिस है, टीसीएस है, एचसीएल टेक, इन्फोसिस, उसके बाद छोटी कंपनीज में हैप्पीएस्ट माइंड्स है। तो हमने देखा है कि जहां पे डिजिटल रेवेन्यू ज्यादा है वहां पे मार्केट को कॉन्फिडेंस है कि प्रॉफिट मार्जिन और मार्केट की एक्सपेंशन बहुत ज्यादा होगी और यही एक कारण है कि आपको आईटी कंपनीज में बहुत तेजी देखने को मिली है। हालांकि ऐसा नहीं कि सर्विसेज बिजनेस पीछे रहेगा, बट एटलीस्ट फॉर द टाइम बिंग जो प्रोडक्ट आईटी में है प्लस जो क्लाउड और डिजिटल सर्विसेज में है उनके लिए मेरे ख्याल से आने वाले 1-2 साल और भी अच्छे रहेंगे। तो जहां पे मैं समझता हूँ स्टॉक बहुत ज्यादा भाग चुके हैं वहां पे थोड़ा सा मुनाफा वसूली जरूर है, लेकिन ओवरऑल आउटलुक काफी अच्छा है। और एक बात जो इन कंपनीज की फेवर में है वो सारी मोस्टली कंपनीज कर्जा मुक्त है, काफी कैश बैलेंसेस पे है। तो उस पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से ये कंपनीज को वैल्यूएशन अभी देर से लेकिन अभी डेफिनेटली अच्छी मिल रही है।
Yeah, Avinash, now talking of the obvious, as the Sensex reaches the lifetime highs, obviously there would be concerns all over among the investors, of course, regarding the current market rally. What would be your advice to our listeners regarding booking profits, if at all, or should they stay invested? Very briefly, actually.
Well, I think, whenever you see a 52-week high for the market, I think it makes sense for any investor, whether he's a retail or a HNI or an institutional investor, to actually take out your capital. Unfortunately, investors just ride on the price rise. But unless you book profit and take out your capital from the market, I think, it would be a little unwise to believe that this rally would continue for a long time. There would be corrections on the way. Although I'm not completely negative, I would believe that, some amount of profit booking is very much essential if somebody has already made a decent amount of profit. And for new investors, I would suggest it's always better to wait for a small, mild correction. I think markets are not going to go one way. There would obviously be ups and downs and volatility. And obviously, the volatility should be used by them on the downside to, accumulate blue chips in their portfolio. So I think profit booking is a must. You should not ignore that in this kind of market. That would be the advice for me, to all the investors who are hearing.
अविनाश गोरक्षकर जी, हमारे साथ जुड़ने और बात करने के लिए धन्यवाद।
बड़े भैया, इस कहावत को जरा एक्सप्लेन तो करिए कि नाच ना जाने आंगन टेढ़ा।
सिंपल है छोटे, इन्वेस्टमेंट डांस की तरह है। अगर ध्यान से सोच समझ कर करोगे तो मस्त रहोगे और अगर लापरवाही की बाजू वाले से भिड़ोगे।
ओ, तो ये बात है।
हाँ छोटे, इन्वेस्ट करने से पहले पूरी जानकारी जुटाइए और बाजू वाले की नहीं, अपनी अकल लगाइए।
बड़े भैया।
अरे छोटे,
भारत के सबसे बड़े स्टॉक एक्सचेंज NSE द्वारा निवेशकों के हित में जारी।
सोच कर, समझ कर, इन्वेस्ट कर।
Welcome back to Market Mantra. Talking of the U.S. markets, on the Wall Street, snapping 5 straight sessions of record highs, the Dow and the S&P slid yesterday, weighed down by a drop in the U.S. retail sales that raised concerns about the economic recovery as well as by disappointing results from the Home Depot. A report showed that U.S. retail sales fell 1.1% in July, more than expected as supply shortages depressed motor vehicle purchases and the boost to spending from the economy's reopening and stimulus checks faded. So the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 282 points or 0.8% to close at 35,343. The S&P 500 lost 32 points or 0.7% to end at 4,448 and the Nasdaq Composite declined 138 points to 14,656. Meanwhile, in an encouraging sign about the economic rebound, a Federal Reserve report showed production at U.S. factories surged in July, and investors are looking for signs about when the Fed will rein in its easy money policies, with minutes from the central bank's latest meeting due today. And now we are joined in by A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director, Business Standard. Welcome, sir. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Talking of the U.S. markets, sir, of course, not only the U.S. markets, but all over, this COVID thing has kind of cast its shadow all over. So how do you see the markets panning out in the short term and also in the long term?
Well, to a great extent, the markets will be influenced by what the Fed does. From the available indications, there is not going to be any knee-jerk reaction from the Fed. The oil market has hardened a bit. The supply side disruptions are causing some concern to the U.S. economy's revival. So I think the Fed will provide a medium-term perspective on what kind of liquidity that will prevail, which will greatly influence not just the U.S. American markets, but also the emerging economies. So on the whole, a lot will depend on how the Fed reacts to the challenges it faces in terms of phasing out the kind of liquidity push that it had engineered in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic.
जी भट्टाचार्य जी, अगर एशियाई बाजारों की बात करें तो आज एशियाई शेयर बाजारों में बढ़त दर्ज हुई है। कहा यह जा रहा है कि अमेरिकी केंद्रीय बैंक फेडरल रिजर्व जो है वो स्टिमुलस में कमी की बात कर रहा है, संभावित कमी कर सकता है वो उसमें। तो एशियाई शेयर बाजारों में ये बढ़त और फेडरल रिजर्व के स्टिमुलस में होने वाली संभावित कमी, इनके बीच में क्या कोरिलेशन है, हम समझना चाहेंगे आपसे।
देखिए, कोरिलेशन मैं समझता हूं कि कोरिलेशन जो है इस वक्त वो इंफॉर्मेशन गैप से है। हालांकि लिक्विडिटी फेज आउट, जो स्टिमुलस फेज आउट का जो ऐलान किया गया है वो इमीडिएट टर्म में नहीं किया गया है, वो मीडियम टू लॉन्ग टर्म में होगा। तो मैं समझता हूं कि मार्केट का जो असेसमेंट जो है, मार्केट का असेसमेंट ये है कि शॉर्ट टर्म में ऐसा कोई झटका नहीं पहुंचेगा, तो मीडियम टर्म में ये झटका आएगा, तो मीडियम टर्म में देख लेंगे। तो इस वक्त मार्केट को थोड़ी बहुत राहत मिली है और उसी का जो रिफ्लेक्शन, उसी का हम आईने में देख रहे हैं। मार्केट में थोड़ी बहुत तेजी आ रही है एशियन मार्केट्स में।
Well, Mr. Bhattacharya, we would like to understand that how would the RBI, our central bank, would actually react to the Fed's decision, if at all, in the short term?
Well, I don't think the Reserve Bank of India will be required to respond to the Fed's decision right now, because the concerns that are right now confronting the Indian economy are somewhat different. RBI's assessment on the inflation front is that the inflation rates have peaked somewhat. That there is liquidity in the economy. The banking system is flush with funds, and it doesn't want to give any negative shock to the economy by any change in its monetary stance. So therefore, I don't see any response from the RBI, even if in the possibility of the Fed deciding to advance its liquidity phase out plan. So I don't see the RBI sensing the need for any reaction in the next few weeks.
Right. And talking of inflation, Bhattacharya ji, certainly inflation is one area of high concern for the economy, and going by the past results, past data of the past few months, certainly things are not looking up very nice. So how do you see this, panning out in the short term?
The inflation has to be seen from two perspectives. One is from the RBI's monetary policy perspective, and the other is the common man's budget perspective. Now, from the RBI's monetary policy perspective, I don't see that that the concerns that had earlier gripped the central bank are valid anymore, because both the wholesale price index and the consumer price index seem to have cooled off from their high levels, and the WPI is still in double digit, but the consumer price index has not crossed the 6% mark in the latest number that we saw a week ago. So therefore, I don't see RBI's plans of staying on with its accommodative monetary policy stance has been upset. So therefore, RBI is not really unduly bothered by whatever is happening on the inflation front, even though the inflation right now at close to 6% is a cause for concern. But that concern is more relevant for the common man's budget, for the demand revival process. So therefore, if this price level continues at this in this trajectory, and if it crosses the 6% level, I would imagine that it will cause some concern. The savers, particularly the elder citizens, the bank savers, they are really inconvenienced. So, which is why you will see that the stock market has benefited from it, in the sense that a lot of people who realize that there is almost a negative return from your bank deposits are now pushed towards the stock market, where the returns are perhaps a little better, at least in the short term.
Indeed. And moving on to some other stories. The CRISIL ratings today said that a broad-based recovery is on for India Inc. currently, and upgraded its credit quality outlook to positive from the earlier cautiously optimistic. The rating agency said that the credit ratio, which illustrates the number of upgrades to downgrades, rose to over 2.5 times in the first 4 months of the fiscal, as compared to 1.33 times in the second half of the last financial year. The rating agency has studied 43 sectors, excluding the financial sector, accounting for 75% of the overall 36 lakh crore rupees in outstanding debt, which shows that the current recovery is broad-based. 28 sectors are set to witness a recovery in demand back to pre-pandemic levels by the end of the fiscal. And among the sectors with the most rating upgrades, construction and engineering and renewable energy benefited from the government's thrust on infrastructure spending, while steel and other metals gained from higher price realizations and profitability, the agency said, adding pharmaceuticals and specialty chemicals continued to see buoyancy backed by domestic and export growth. And talking of ICRA now, the GDP growth is estimated to come at the deceptively high level of 20% for the April to June 2021 quarter, rating agency ICRA said today. And ICRA also said that the low base of the last year, when the GDP had contracted by close to 24%, conceals the impact of the second wave of the COVID-19 infections. ICRA said the economic activity is boosted by robust government capital expenditure, merchandise exports and demand from the farm sector. Construction activity benefited from the healthy central and the state government capital expenditure spending in the first quarter of this fiscal, and the rating agency cautioned that the organized sector is expected to have gained at the cost of less formal space during this period. Well, Mr. Bhattacharya, talking of this deceptively high level of 20% growth from April to June, that is the Q1 of the current fiscal, how do you see this as when compared to the last year? Of course, it's dichotomous indeed.
Well, it is deceptive because it is a statistical recovery. In a sense that the economy contracted by over 24% in the first quarter of 2021. That was last year, April-June 2020. Now, this is, if the economy now recovers with a growth rate of over 20%, you still haven't really recovered to a position where you were in April 2020. So, which is why I think ICRA is calling this recovery deceptive. A point well taken. But what you cannot probably deny is that there is an overall sense of well-being about the state of the Indian economy. All high-frequency data that you see in the economy, the demand side, and even on the supply side, you see some sort of a pickup. So whether it is a question of the automobile sales or whether it is a question of cement sales, or whether it is a question of financial transactions, the financial health of banks, the corporate sector's profitability, everything that you see, there is some sort of a sense that the economy has weathered the adverse impacts of the second wave in April-May and rapidly coming back to a point where it is probably on way to recovery. Now, the key question is that can the overall annual growth rate be close to around 9.5 or 10%? Now, if that happens, then I would say the Indian economy would have overcome the losses that it sustained during the COVID-19, and it can start its journey afresh with new goals in sight. So I think it's a recovery phase, but it is a recovery phase from a very low base. But there is no reason to doubt that it is a recovery. But remember that the agriculture sector is showing different signs, in the sense that you are seeing the acreage is actually less than 2% from last year. You are seeing a sharp rise in demand for job work, in the sense that Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, which means the agricultural workers are still wanting demand work from the NREGA scheme. So, which is not a very good sign, but it is a mixed picture. Agriculture, rural economy is still to recover. Urban economy, the corporate sector, automobile sales, the middle India is recovering. And the important sign would be that when the vaccination pace picks up further, I would say that it will help sustain the current
Mr. Bajjar, we are afraid we are running short of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
And
जी, और अब रुक करते हैं अगली खबर का। केंद्रीय मंत्रिमंडल ने खाद्य तेलों के उत्पादन में वृद्धि करने और आयात पर निर्भरता में कमी लाने के लिए कई कदम उठाने के निर्णय लिए हैं। आज नई दिल्ली में मीडिया को जानकारी देते हुए सूचना और प्रसारण मंत्री अनुराग सिंह ठाकुर ने बताया कि मंत्रिमंडल ने पाम ऑयल के आयात में कमी लाने के लिए कुछ प्रमुख निर्णय लिए हैं और खाद्य तेल पाम ऑयल राष्ट्रीय मिशन के कार्यान्वयन को अनुमति दी है। इस मिशन को केंद्रीय प्रायोजित योजना के रूप में कार्यान्वित किया जाएगा।
And global crude oil prices steadied today after 4 days of declines, with investors still worried about the outlook for fuel demand as the use of rail, air and other form of transport remain constrained and surging among COVID-19 cases worldwide.
और अब कार्यक्रम के चलते चलते मुख्य समाचारों पर फिर से नजर डाल लेते हैं।
Before we close, a reminder of the headlines. Erasing all its early gains, Sensex drops 163 points, Nifty loses 46 points, Rupee gains 11 paise, credit rating agency CRISIL upgrades India Inc.'s credit quality outlook to positive from the earlier cautiously optimistic, and Union Cabinet approves financial outlay of over 11,000 crore rupees to boost the production of edible oils and reduce imports. And that's it in this edition of Market Mantra. This is Nishit Kumar along with me, Vishal Sharma, saying adios till we meet again the next time.
Market